Yuval Harari, of course, is a best-selling author and thinker whose work engages us in the history of humanity and where we're heading. Thomas Friedman is also a best-selling author and columnist who for decades has been a guide to the world for readers of his columns and his books. We're in very good hands for the evening. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Yuval Harari and Thomas Friedman. So Yuval, we're going to begin with you. Obviously, when we think about the future, we think about what's happening in the world and what is setting the global agenda. And if you could speak about the global agenda.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say about the global agenda is that it exists. There is a global agenda, which is not self-evident these days, because with all the talk, at least, about the rise of nationalism and tribalism and the clash of civilizations and so forth, we sometimes tend to forget that in a very deep sense, all of humanity today constitutes a single civilization. Yes, we have a lot of conflicts, but every civilization, every community, every family has a lot of conflicts. The people you fight most with are your family members, not with strangers, because they are there. So the fact that the world is full of conflict doesn't mean that we are not a single community or a single civilization. And I think in a deep sense, almost all humans today, or at least almost all countries today, understand the fundamentals of reality in the same way. They understand politics in the same way. If you think about China or the USA, Iran or Israel, they understand the basics of politics in the same way, the basics of economics in the same way, and the basics of nature in the same way. They argue about a lot of things, but when it comes time to build a hospital or an economy or a nuclear bomb, they do it in the same way. And just as we have a set of similar ideas and practices, we also, all of humanity, we have a set of common problems, global problems, which can only be solved on a global level. And of these global problems, the three most important are nuclear war, climate change, and technological disruption. Now, the first two are quite familiar by now. The third, technological disruption, is the most mysterious. Most people don't really understand what's coming. Even most experts cannot really say what kinds of threats, what kinds of dangers the new technologies, especially AI, artificial intelligence, and bioengineering, will create. There are a lot of scenarios, scary scenarios. Like if you think about artificial intelligence, so one scary scenario is that it will lead to the emergence, to the rise of a global useless class. Just as the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century created the urban working class, so the automation revolution of the 21st century might create the useless class, and much of the political and social history of the coming decades might revolve around the problems and the hopes and the fears of this new class. Another danger is that new technologies might lead to the collapse of liberal democracy, especially if you think about the combination, the merger of biotech and infotech. They might very soon reach the point when they create systems, they create algorithms that understand us better than we understand ourselves. And once you have an external algorithm that understands you better than you understand yourself, liberal democracy, as we have known it for the last century or so, is doomed. It will have to adapt to the new conditions, it will have to reinvent itself in a radical new form, or it will collapse. Because you can say that the Achilles heel of liberal democracy is the heart. Liberal democracy trusts in the feelings of human beings. And that worked as long as nobody could understand your feelings better than you yourself or your mother. But if there is an algorithm out there that understands your feelings better than your mother and can press your emotional buttons better than your mother, and you won't even understand that this is happening, then liberal democracy will become an emotional puppet show. And we have these slogans of listen to your heart, follow your heart. But what happens if your heart is a foreign agent, is a double agent, serving somebody else who knows how to press your emotional buttons, who knows how to make you angry, how to make you bored, how to make you joyful? This is the kind of threat that we are already beginning to see emerging today, for example, in elections and referendums. So really, I would say that the three big challenges, the three top items on our global agenda is how to prevent nuclear war, how to prevent climate change, and how to learn to control the new technology before it learns to control us.
Thank you. Tom, when we think about the future of humanity, we obviously have to think about our understanding of the world. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you understand the world today.
Well, first of all, Rachel, it's great to be with you and Yuval, and thank you all for coming out. This is a real treat. So in my last, as a columnist, one of the things I'm always asking myself is, how does the machine work? What are the biggest gears and pulleys shaping or reshaping the world today? And in my last book, thank you for being late, picking up really on some of the themes Yuval spoke about, I argued that what is shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days, is that we're in the middle of three nonlinear accelerations with the three largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth in the developing world. If you put that on a graph, it actually looks like a giant hockey stick. The market for me is globalization, but not your grandfather's globalization. That was containers on ships and planes. That's actually flat to going down right now. But digital globalization. So everything's being digitized and globalized. Put that on a graph, whether it's measuring data consumed per month or cell phones, it looks like a hockey stick. And lastly, Moore's Law, coined by Gordon Moore in 1965, the co-founder of Intel, argued that the speed and power of microchips will double every 24 months. It's closer to 30 months now, but never mind. Moore's Law is held up for 53 years. Put it on a graph, it looks like a giant hockey stick. So we're actually in the middle of three hockey stick accelerations all at the same time. And I believe it's the interaction between them that really is not just changing our world, it's reshaping our world. And it's reshaping five realms in particular: politics, geopolitics, ethics, the community, and the workplace. So as I think about politics right now, that something that's on everybody's mind, one of the things you really see is that political parties all over the world, here in the UK and the United States, they're blowing up. Some are in power, so they think they're alive, but they're all basically dead. And that's because, in my view, they were all born of an industrial age model, that the central theme was capitalism versus labor, or big government versus small government, and the axis of politics was left to right and right to left. What I would argue, and this gets to how I think about the world today, is that that model is no longer relevant. I think the way to think about politics today is through the model of climate change. But I think we're in the middle of three climate changes at once. First, we're in the change of the climate of the climate. We're going from what I call later to now. So when I was growing up in Minnesota in the 50s and 60s, later was when I could clean that lake, repair that river, save that forest, rescue that orangutan. I could do it now or I could do it later. Well, today, later is officially over. Later will now be too late. So whatever you're going to save, please save it now. That's a climate change. We're going through a change in the climate of globalization. I think we're going from an interconnected world to an interdependent world. And in an interdependent world, you get a kind of geopolitical inversion where first of all, your friends start to be able to kill you faster than your enemies. If Greek and Italian banks go under tonight, this room is half full. Greece, Italy, wait a minute, they're in NATO, they're in the EU. In an interdependent world, they can kill us. And in an interdependent world, your rivals falling is actually more dangerous than your rivals rising. So if China takes 6 more islands in the South China Sea tonight, don't quote me on this, couldn't care less. If China loses 6% growth tonight, this room is empty. That's a climate change. And lastly, we're going through a change in the climate of business and technology. I'm a big believer that, one reason I focus on technology so much, I'm a big believer that whatever can be done will be done. The only question in business is, will it be done by you or to you? But just don't think it won't be done. So I'm always asking what can be done. And when you look at AI and some of the themes that Yuval talked about, I think every company today can, therefore must, analyze, optimize, prophesize, customize, socialize, and digitize/automatize virtually any job, product, or service. So they can analyze now, thanks to big data. They can find the needle in the haystack of their data as the norm, not the exception. They can optimize. I flew here on British Airways, Rolls-Royce engines. Those engines are actually connected by sensor to Rolls-Royce, and they could tell BA exactly what altitude to fly every mile to optimize their energy efficiency. They can prophesize. So you may have seen the IBM Watson ad where the IBM Watson repairman comes to a high-rise building, says, I'm here to fix the elevator, and the doorman says the elevator's not broken. And he says, I know, but it will be in 6 weeks and 3 days. Okay, you can do predictive analytics on anything now. You can socialize, that is, you can connect now to your customers, your suppliers, your employees on a horizontal way like never before. You can customize just for guys from Minnesota with brown eyes and a mustache. And you can digitize/automatize virtually any job, product, or service. You put all those together, and every business today finds himself in the middle of a climate change. So as I thought about that, I thought, well, what do you want when the climate changes? I think you want 2 things. You want resilience. You need to be able to take a blow because you get disruptive behavior when the climate changes. But you also want propulsion. You want to be able to move ahead. You don't want to be curled up in a ball under your bed waiting for the climate change to pass. So as I thought about that, I said, who do I go to find how you get resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? And then I realized I knew this woman. She was 3.8 billion years old. Her name was Mother Nature, and she dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I called her up, made an appointment, went out to see her. I sat down and I said, Mother Nature, how do you produce resilience and propulsion? And when the climate changes, she said, well, Tom, everything I do, I have to tell you, I do unconsciously, but these are my strategies. First of all, she said, I'm incredibly adaptive. In my world, it's not the smartest that survive, it's not the strongest, it's actually the most adaptive that survive. And I do it, she said, through a rather brutal mechanism I call natural selection. Second, she said, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see an opening in nature, a blank space, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. Third, she said, I'm incredibly pluralistic. Oh, Tom, she said, I'm the most pluralistic person you've ever met. I try 20 different species of everything, see who wins. And she did tell me something interesting. She told me her most diverse ecosystems are her most resilient and propulsive ecosystems. Fourth, she told me she's totally sustainable in a circular way. Everything is food, eat, food, poop, seed, eat, food, poop, seed. Nothing is wasted. Fifth, she said, I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox in my thinking. Nothing dogmatic about me. I'll try any trees with any soils, any bees with any flowers. And lastly, she did mention that she does believe in the laws of bankruptcy. She told me she kills all her failures, returns them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and takes their energy to nourish her successes. Well, my argument is that the community, the country, the government, and the business that most closely mirrors Mother Nature's strategies for building resilience and propulsion when the climate changes is the one that will thrive in this age of acceleration. And since when I was writing my book, it was the 2016 election, I actually imagine, what if Mother Nature was running against Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016? And so I created Mother Nature's political party based on these strategies. I won't go into it. I'll just close by saying that on some issues, Mother Nature, she's out there on the left with Bernie Sanders because she believes in universal health care and making lifelong learning completely tax-free, because she understands in this world that Yuval is describing, it's going to be too damn fast for a lot of people. So she wants to strengthen our safety nets to bounce people back into the game and protect them. But at the same time, Mother Nature would be out there on the right with the Wall Street Journal editorial page. She'd actually be for abolishing all corporate taxes, only unlike our Republican Party, she'd replace them with a carbon tax, a tax on sugar, a tax on bullets, and a small financial transaction tax. She would get radically entrepreneurial over here to pay for our safety nets over here. Unfortunately, in our old industrial age model of politics, if you're for stronger safety nets, you're almost never for radical entrepreneurship. If you're for radical entrepreneurship, you're almost never for stronger safety nets. What would Mother Nature call that? Stupid. That's what she'd call it. Because she would understand you will never produce resilience unless you're a hybrid of these two. And because our current political parties are not built on that model, I think they're all struggling now to find a way to talk about politics.
And that we'd also be hearing from Mother Nature this evening. So there's the three of us on stage and a variety of perspective.
Say that Mother Nature, she has problems also, not our problems. As you mentioned, she's quite keen on extinction. And she does believe in that. And she wouldn't care if we are unable to cope with our problems and go extinct.
Yep.
Also, she wouldn't care very much if humankind splits and say a small percentage becomes a new species, better adapted to the new conditions, and a couple of billions just go in the way of the Neanderthals and the mammoth and all that. Yeah. So it's very good to learn from Mother Nature, but copying her methods too closely would be, I think, very bad news for a lot of people.
My view, Yuval, is get the best out of her and cushion the worst. Because, and I do agree with you. You know, Mother Nature, one of my science teachers, Rob Walton, talked about this, that she's just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. You can't talk her up, you can't talk her down. You can't say, Mother Nature, we're having a recession this year. Could we take a year off on the climate? She's going to actually do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And to put it in American baseball terms, Mother Nature always bats last, and she always bats 1,000. So do not mess with Mother Nature, which is exactly what we're doing.
I wonder, we're obviously, talking on a long-term framework here. But of course, I imagine many of you came here tonight thinking about, what's immediately in front of you, what news alerts are on your phones, Tom, I believe you've referred to the American president as a brain-eating disease, perhaps what he might be up to, what else is going on. I wonder if we could both speak to how we deal with what is unrelenting in front of us while thinking about the broader challenges that you've outlined. How do we do both at once? How do we adapt to do both at once?
Well, go ahead.
First of all, can we have a bit more light on the audience? Because it's very difficult to see who I'm talking to. It's just a sea of darkness, and it's nice to see some faces. After all, it's really about you, not about us.
Okay.
You will have to deal with the future also. It's very difficult for people. I mean, humans have proven throughout history that they are very good when it comes to short-term problems and solutions, but it's extremely difficult to foresee the long-term consequences. And one of the things that happened, if we're talking about, again, various climate changes, is that time is accelerating. So thousands of years ago, something like the agricultural revolution takes centuries, even thousands of years. and the consequences of our decision today to start growing wheat, we will see, or not we, somebody, our descendants, will see the consequences of this decision in a couple of centuries, maybe even in thousands of years. But now time is accelerating, so the long term is not 2,000 years or 200 years, the long term is 20 years. We are really in an unprecedented situation in history when nobody knows the basics about how the world would look like in 20 or 30 years. Not just the basics of geopolitics, who would be the big superpowers in 20 or 30 years, or what will be the major alliances in the world in 20, 30 years. We don't know much more basic stuff, such as what the job market would look like, what kind of skills people will need, what family structure would look like, what gender relations would look like. So it's really the first time in history when we have no idea how human society will be like in a couple of decades. And this means, among other things, that for the first time in history, we have no idea what to teach in schools. And so we focus on the short term. And not just on the short term, but actually we even go back and focus on the past. Connecting to what you said about the crisis of most political parties that still think in terms of the 20th century and right versus left and capitalism versus socialism and all that. I think that parties and government in most of the world today, they are doing a far better job than ever before in running the day-to-day business of the country. It may not look like this, but I'm a medievalist, so I constantly compare the government of today to the government of Edward III or St. Louis or somebody like that, and it's wonderful. The world we are living in is really wonderful. So they are doing an excellent job in the day-to-day business of the country. But what they have almost lost completely is the ability to have a long-term plan for the future. Because they can't see. They have no realistic vision of, again, basic things like the job market in 30 years. So what you see in more and more countries is that they look to the past instead of to the future. And instead of formulating meaningful visions for where humankind will be in 2050, they repackage nostalgic fantasies about the past. And there is a kind of competition. Who can look back furthest? So you have Donald Trump wanting to go back to the 1950s or something like that, and you have Putin basically wanting to go back to the Tsarist Empire a century after the Bolshevik Revolution, and you have ISIS that wants to go back to the 7th century Arabia, and in my country, in Israel, they beat everybody. They want to go back 2,500 years to the age of the Bible, so we win. We have the longest term vision backwards. And this is and as a historian, I can tell you two things about the past. The past wasn't a very good time. You don't really want to go back there. And secondly, it's not coming back. No matter what you do, you can't bring it back. And so we are facing really a crisis of the inability of the political system to produce meaningful visions for the future. Maybe the only place in the world where there is serious work on producing a meaningful vision for the future is in China. Whether it's a good vision or a bad vision, it's a different question. But this is the one place, I think, where the government is seriously thinking in future terms and in long terms of decades, and not in terms of 1 or 2 years, and certainly not in terms of going back decades and centuries.
So just to pick up on what Yuval said, Rich, that, well, starting with Trump, I describe Trump as a brain-eating disease because as a columnist, you're always in this position every day where he says or does something so outrageous You feel if you don't write about it, you're normalizing him. But if you do write about it, he stole your brains for a day. Now, if you do that twice a week, 4 times or 8 times a month, you'll wake up after a year and discover all you've written about is that knucklehead. And he's actually sucked your brains out. So it's a real challenge. So, the subtitle of my book is An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. Everything's sped up, and the reason it's called Thank You for Being Late is the title comes from meeting people in Washington, D.C. for breakfast over the years, and every once in a while someone would come 15, 20 minutes late. They'd say, Tom, I'm really sorry. It was the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And one day, 3.5 years ago, an energy entrepreneur, Peter Corcel, came 15 minutes late and said, I'm really sorry, it was the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And I just spontaneously said to him, actually, Peter, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And best of all, I just connected 2 ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. People started to get into it. They'd say, well, you're welcome. Because they understood I was actually giving them permission to pause, to slow down. In fact, my favorite quote from the front of the book is from my teacher and friend, Dov Seidman, who says, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, rethink, and reimagine. And boy, don't we need to do a lot of that right now. Now, to pick up on Yuval's point about leadership, when the world is fast, small errors in navigation can have huge consequences. When we just needed to go 50 miles at 5 miles an hour, well, if you had a bad president or prime minister or governor or mayor, you'd get off track, but the pain of getting back on track was fairly tolerable. But when you need to feel like you're going 50,000 miles at 5,000 miles an hour, when you have a bad leader now, you can get so far off track. It's like a 747 pilot just changing 2 digits as he enters the navigation of his jet, and suddenly you're halfway across the world in the wrong direction. And so leadership really matters more right now. Now, I think I would agree with what Yuval said about China in this sense. I think China's leaders do wake up every day more than the average leader in the world and start their day by asking, what world am I living in? What are the biggest trends in this world? And how do I align myself with those trends? Unlike, I think, a lot of leaders in the world. But I would tell you, I'm seeing amazing leadership in America today in 2 places. One is at the corporate level, and the other is at the local level. So at the corporate level, as I think about the workplace challenge, the way I put it, I think our central challenge is how do we turn AI into IA? How do we take artificial intelligence and turn it into intelligent assistance, ANCE, intelligent assistance, ANTS, and intelligent algorithms so more people can learn faster and govern smarter? So I'll give you an example of intelligent assistance that I use. It's the HR department, Human Resources Department at AT&T, our giant telecom. So, what's interesting about AT&T, 330,000 employees in one of the most competitive businesses in the world, global telecom. Pretty good chance that whatever is going on in their HR department is coming to a neighborhood near you. So what's going on in HR at AT&T? Well, they begin their year now with their leader, Randall Stevenson. He starts the year with a pretty radically transparent speech about where the company's going, what businesses they're going to be in, and what skills you need as a worker at AT&T that year. Filters down through the company. Then they put all their managers, 110,000 people, on their own in-house LinkedIn system. So I'm there, it's Tom Friedman, and it has my academic background and the jobs I've had in the company. Then they match that up with the skill sets. I'm making up the number because I don't remember it exactly, but it's probably 10 skill sets you need that year to be a rising employee at AT&T. They've got my CV there on LinkedIn, and they realize I've got 7 of the 10, but I'm missing 3. Then they partnered with Sebastian Thrun from Udacity, the online learning university, and he created nano degrees for all 10 skill sets. Then they came to me and said, Tom, here's the deal. We will give you up to $8,000 a year to take the nano degrees for the skill sets you're missing. In fact, we heard that you're interested in computer science. We just created an online computer science degree for $6,000 a year with Georgia Tech. In fact, we heard you're interested in history. You can take an online course from that guy, Yuval Harari. We'll pay for that as well. Okay? Just one condition, Mr. Tom. You have to take these courses at home at night on your own time, not on company time. Now, if I say to them, you know what, Mr. AT&T, I've actually climbed up one too many telephone poles. I'm just not into this anymore. They now have a wonderful severance package for me, okay? But I will not be working there much longer. So they flush out now about 30,000 people. They take in about 30,000 people. They advance about 10,000 every year. What is AT&T's social contract today with their employees? It's that you can be a lifelong employee still today if you're at AT&T, but now only if you're a lifelong learner. If you are not ready to be a lifelong learner, you can no longer be a lifelong employee at AT&T. And that is the social contract coming to a neighborhood near you. And that's why one of my teachers, Heather McGowan, is an education expert, and this picks up on something that Yuval said. Heather likes to say, Mom, Dad, never ask your kids today what you want to be when you grow up, because whatever it is not going to be here, unless it's policeman or fireman, okay? Only ask your kid today how you want to be when you grow up. Will you have an agile learning mindset? Will you be predisposed to be a lifelong learner long after you've left home and Mom and Dad are not there to say, Yuval, have you done your homework? And that leads to what I think is really roiling societies today, and Yuval touched on this with these people who might be out of work, which is something I learned from Marina Gorbis, who runs the Institute of the Future. If we were having this conversation 15 years ago, one of the themes we'd be talking about is the digital divide. You know, London's got internet, Manchester doesn't. Europe's got it, Africa doesn't. Digital divide, it was huge. I believe that digital divide is rapidly disappearing. I don't know when it'll be gone, but I'm sure in a decade it'll be gone. And when it is, the most important divide in the world is going to be the self-motivation divide. Whose kids have the self-motivation to be a lifelong learner long after they've left home and Mom and Dad are not there to ask them to do their homework? Because what you learn in your first year now could be outdated by your fourth year of college. The idea that you can get a 4-year degree and dine out on that for 30 years is like so 1950s. And that has a lot of people really unnerved, because a lot of people were actually born and bred to do what they were told. And God bless them, they built your country and mine, and Yuval's. But just doing what you're told now will not bring you average income and an average lifestyle. And I think that has a lot of people really frightened.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is extremely stressful. I mean, I just hear you, and you know, there is so much stress.
Stressful for me.
And reinventing yourself again and again throughout your life sounds terrible to most people. Because, you know, when you're 15 or you're 16, then you're inventing yourself, and it's still stressful when you're 15, but it's still doable. When you reach 40, 50, you don't want to change. Yes, I want to keep on learning new things and to gain experience and to go into new places and so forth, but to really change the deep structures of my personality, yes, of my professional skills, to learn things afresh. It sounds, you know, very exciting and very like good, but it's actually extremely difficult. Yeah. And if this is where we are heading, and we are heading in that direction, we will be facing a stress epidemic, even far worse than today. And another thing is with all these algorithms that, again, are watching us all the time and are learning our abilities and our problems and whether we are self-motivated or not, once the algorithms reach the conclusion that you are not going to make it, you will not be able to make it. I mean, we are used to this problem of discrimination against people based on wrong statistics. Like in the 20th century, discrimination against people usually took the form of discriminating against entire groups. based either on faulty statistics or based on just religious biases and racism and so forth. So there was, if you were gay, you had discrimination against all gays. If you're a woman, then all women. And one of the things about it is that you could actually do something about it, because most of the time, the biases were not true, and because many people suffered from them, they could join together and have some political action against the discrimination. Now, in the coming years, in the coming decades, we will face individual discrimination, and it might actually be based on a good assessment of who you are. I mean, if AT&T, if the algorithms and the big data algorithms of AT&T, they follow you around, they look up your Facebook profile, your DNA, your records from kindergarten until today, they will be able to figure out quite accurately who you are. And if they, for example, find out that, oh, he lacks motivation, on the X scale, on the Harari scale, or the Friedman scale of self-motivation, 0 to 10, he is just 7.1. And we don't want to accept to our company people of less than 8.2. And we know from experience that, yes, we can give you a little push, but you just lack what we need. And you will not be able to do anything, or almost anything, about this discrimination. First of all, because it's just you. They don't discriminate against you or me because you're Jewish or gay or black or whatever, because you're you. And the worst thing is, it will be true. I mean, they got me. I really lack self-motivation. They really got me. So what do I do about it? And it sounds funny in a way, but if you think about it deeply, it's terrible. Everybody, almost everybody has something, and you will not be able to do much about it.
So let me give you the flip side of that, because everything about these systems, Yuval, is everything and its opposite. Mm-hmm. So you just described the downside of that. But let me talk about intelligent assistant for a second, example I give in the book. So the example I use is the janitorial staff at Qualcomm, big American tech company in San Diego. They have a 64 building campus. They built the inside of your iPhone, not Apple. That's why Apple's always suing them over patents. And 3 years ago, they took 6 of their buildings, they put sensors on everything. Every door, window, light, pipe, faucet, drain, computer. And they beamed all that data up to the cloud. Now they beam it down onto an iPad with this incredibly user-friendly interface for their janitorial staff. So if you leave your computer on or a pipe bursts above my head, the janitor knows it before you or I do, and they just swipe down to see who to call or how to fix it themselves. They've actually turned their janitors into maintenance technologists. Their janitors now give tours to foreign visitors. What do you think that does for the dignity of a janitor? Because he or she now has an intelligent assistant enabling them to learn faster and work smarter. I will give you another example, intelligent algorithm. So those of you American students here know that in 11th grade we have to take the PSAT exam, the practice SAT exam, to take the SAT exam to measure our math and verbal skills to get into the college of our choice. So we also know in America that a lot of parents go out in 11th grade and hire a tutor for $200 an hour to goose your scores in math and verbal. A completely rigged game. Because if you come from a family or neighborhood where you can't afford that, you're really at a disadvantage. So 3 years ago, the College Board that administers the PSAT and SAT exam, your A-levels and O-levels, partnered with Khan Academy, the online learning platform, to create free PSAT and SAT prep. So the way it works now is I take my PSAT in 11th grade, I get the results back. I did really well in verbal. It says, Tom, you could be a journalist actually. But it says I have a problem with math. It actually says, I, Tom Friedman, personally, because it knows me, have a problem with fractions and right angles. Then it takes me to a practice site just for fractions and right angles. Doesn't waste any time on my weaknesses. If I do well there, it takes me to another site that says, Tom, you could be in AP Math. What? In AP Math? I mean, no one in my family is in AP Math. No one in my neighborhood. Yeah, you could be in AP Math. If I do well there, it takes me to another site with 180 college scholarships. Last year, 3 million American kids got free PSAT and SAT prep on this intelligent algorithm. And I'll give you another one that's very relevant to the point you raised. We have about 32 million people who started college but never finished. They go 1 year, 2 years, 2.5, 3.5 years, they drop out, go to get a job, or do it online. The algorithm says you have no BA, no job. So a whole new set of intelligent algorithms have emerged. One I profile is opportunity at work. So what they do now is you can go to them with your 1 year, 2 year, 2.5 of knowledge. They will badge what you actually know and what you can do with what you know. And they partner with companies to slot you in without a BA. So I profiled a young African-American woman, Lashana Lewis. She went to Michigan Tech for 3.5 years, studied computer science, had to drop out for family reasons. She went back home, was driving a school bus to and from a computer school, couldn't make that up, and working at a law firm on the help desk, helping lawyers rediscover their lost passwords. Okay? She was discovered by Opportunity at Work. They partnered with MasterCard, slotted her in as they measured her knowledge, slotted her in as a systems engineer at MasterCard. She's now a senior systems engineer at MasterCard. And as she says in the last line of her interview, and Mr. Friedman, I still don't have a BA. So that's an intelligent, that's the other side of this. And what I've found is there is enormous innovation going on the other side of this. You're absolutely right on the downside, but for every downside of this, somebody's invented an upside. I would just add one other point. You know, what was the fastest growing restaurant chain in America, according to Entrepreneur Magazine, in 2015? I mean, you never guess it. It's actually called Paint Night. Fastest growing restaurant chain in America. What is Paint Night? It's paint by numbers for adults in bars. Turns out adults like to get together in a bar, have an artist draw a design for them, and they paint by numbers together according to that design and have a drink. It's amazing how many adults like to paint by numbers in bars, okay? Who knew, okay? There are all these jobs out there, and that's why I would close by saying, if you really want to blow your mind, go to Airbnb's website. You'll notice now there are two icons on the front page. One's homes. That's because I'm coming to London like my sister did this week and I want to get an apartment here, you know, we all know that. But now the other one's called experiences. And click, if you want to have some fun, click experiences. It's people monetizing their passions. I will give you a tour of 3-man basketball games in Havana at night with a mojito at the end. Read that one, the American mother who said, I sent my 18-year-old on this, he didn't come back till 2 in the morning, he was having so much fun. I'll teach you how to make falafel, you know, in Jaffa. I'll teach you how to make it, you know, this. Is it full-time employment? Maybe, maybe not. It's the fastest growing part of Airbnb's website, and I predict in 5 years, it'll be the biggest job site in the world. People monetizing their passions.
I wonder, sticking with this theme, we've been talking a lot about individuality. We'll be able to learn individually just how unmotivated we are, I guess, or perhaps motivated to go paint plates by numbers. So we'll know so much more about ourselves as individuals. How is that going to affect how we all live together? Tom, you've written about, I believe you called yourself a pluralism supremacist. How does increased knowledge of our individuality, exactly just how well-suited we are for a job or poorly suited for any job, what does that mean in how we all live together? And are we moving more inward in this moment, or where do you see pluralism going?
Well, it's very hard to say. I mean, of course, as you said, I mean, every technology has good potential and bad potential. This is what is different about disruptive technologies compared to nuclear war and climate change.
Right.
Nuclear war this is obviously terrible.
Right.
Nobody wants it. The question is just how to prevent it. With disruptive technology, the danger in a way is far greater because it has some wonderful potential. So there are a lot of forces that for some very good reasons are pushing us faster and faster to develop and adopt these disruptive technologies. And it's very difficult to know in advance what the consequences will be in terms of community, in terms of relations between people, in terms of politics. 20 years ago, in the high days of internet optimism, You had all these extremely optimistic and today we say naive dreams and visions that the internet will bring everybody closer together. You could have friends from all over the world, and there will be freedom of expression, and all the dictators will fall, and the world will turn into one big, happy, and peaceful community. And this didn't happen. And we look back today and we say, oh, this was extremely naive. I mean, did people forget about human nature? Did we learn nothing from history? And the answer is yes. I mean, we learned very little from history. Does it mean that every new technology will just make things worse? No, obviously not. But it's extremely difficult to know which way it will go. I think that history is just not deterministic. And again, when you look to the past, when you look to the 20th century, and what people could do with new technologies, and you can use the trains and radio to build Nazi Germany, or you could use the same technology to build liberal democracy. And it's kind of touch and go, who wins? I don't think there is any predetermined or preordained winner in these competitions. So again, with AI, we can sit here all evening and a couple of more evenings and spin all kinds of likely scenarios, which are all possible. What will happen? Some very good and some very bad and some in between. And we just don't know. I think as a historian, the best thing, the most important thing we need to realize is that there is no predetermined story, which is in a way very frightening. And we are now living with the collapse of the last story of inevitability. And in the 1990s, in the same era of the extremely optimistic vision of the internet, we also had this story, this idea that history is over, that we know who won the great ideological battle of the 20th century, liberal democracy and free market capitalism came out on top, and now it's just a question of time until it will spread and take over the whole world. And again, this now seems extremely naive. And the moment we are at now is a moment of extreme disillusionment and bewilderment because we have no idea where things will go from here. This is why I think it's very important to be aware of the downside, of the dangerous scenarios of the new technologies. I mean, obviously the corporations, the engineers, the people in the laboratories, they naturally focus on all the enormous benefits that these technologies might bring us. And it falls to historians and to philosophers and to social scientists to think about all the ways in which things can go wrong.
So when Frank Fukuyama wrote The End of History, I at the same time wrote a book called Lexus and the Olive Tree. And the argument of the book was that I think what is going to shape the future is the tension between all of these things that are old, faith, community, religion, sect, tribe, all the things that anchor us in the world, olive trees, and the interaction between them and technology. And I still believe that's certainly for me a helpful framework, because what we do with those passions, how we govern them, how we mobilize them, it can be for good or for ill. And that for me, Yuval, it's a good segue to talk about the ethics question, and one you wrote a whole book about, Homo Deus. So I just did a little chapter on it, and let me give mine, and then you give yours, because I think there'll be an interesting contrast between the two. So my version of the argument you made, the chapter on it is called "Is God in Cyberspace?" Is God in cyberspace? Best question I ever got on book tour. 1990, I was selling Lexus and the Olive Tree in Portland, Oregon. Question time came. Young man stood up in the balcony. He said, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I have no idea. Felt like an idiot. So I got home, I called my spiritual teacher. He was a rabbi I got to know at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem when I was the New York Times correspondent there. Great Talmudic scholar, Tzvi Marks. Now lives in Amsterdam, married to a Dutch priest, interesting character. And I called him up in Amsterdam. I said, Tzvi, I got a question I've never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? And he said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we actually have two concepts of the Almighty, a biblical concept and a post-biblical concept. So the biblical concept is that the Almighty is almighty. He smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, lying, people smearing one another on Twitter, and now we know fake news. So fortunately, though, he said, we have a post-biblical view of God. And the post-biblical view of God is that God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. I really liked his answer. I put it into the paperback edition of Lexis Theology in 2000, where none of you saw it, and it sat there for 16 years. Anyways, I started working on this book, and I found myself spontaneously retelling that story. And I said, why are you retelling that story? And it became obvious to me for two reasons, and one just happened. I think in the last couple of years, in the developed world, we began living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. It's now where you go to find a date, find a spouse, buy a house, buy a car, write a book, buy a book, get a mortgage, give a loan, get your news, generate your news. We're now living, do your banking, your brokerage, we're now living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. And my definition of cyberspace is that it's a realm where we're all connected and no one's in charge. So there are no courts in cyberspace, no policemen, no stoplights, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. But that's where we're living our lives. Another way to describe it, we're living 51% of our lives in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. At the same time, because of these accelerations you and I both have talked about, I think we're standing at a moral intersection we have never stood at before as a species. In 1945, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us post-Hiroshima, and that was the United States. If it had to be one country, I'm glad it was the United States. I think we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us. And at the same time, where all of us could actually fix everything. Because these accelerated powers, for the first time, are creating a world where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us now, if we actually put our minds to it, we have the tools to feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet. We have never been to this intersection before, where one of us can kill all of us, and all of us could fix everything. And what does that mean? It means we've never been more godlike as a species than we are today. Well, put those two together. We've never lived more of our lives in a realm that's God-free, and we have never been more godlike. And what that means is that what every person thinks, feels, and believes really matters. It means everyone needs to be in the grip of sustainable values. It means, at a minimum, everyone needs to be in the embrace of the golden rule. And every faith and culture has their version of it: do unto others as you wish them to do unto you, because you now live in a world where more people can do unto you farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. Putin did unto us in our election. And we can do unto others farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. Everyone needs to be in the embrace of the golden rule. I know what you're thinking. I actually gave this thing as a commencement address at Olin College of Engineering 2 years ago. And I said to the parents there, I know what you're thinking. You paid $200,000 for your kid to get an engineering degree. And who do they bring as the commencement speaker? But a knucklehead promoting the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And what I told them is what I would say again tonight. I think in this age of acceleration, naivete is the new realism. Because what's really naive is thinking we're going to be okay in a world that is this interdependent, where men, women, and machines get this super empowered, if everyone is not in the embrace of the golden rule. Where does the golden rule come from? I think two places primarily: strong families and healthy communities. And that's why my focus and my work today is so much on healthy communities.
But I would say that maybe the big problem is not so much morality as it is causality. That we just...
Say it again.
Causality.
Causality.
I mean, the ability to understand the chains of causes and effects in the world. I think there is no lack of values today in the world, but to really act well, it's not enough to have good values. You need to have a good understanding of the chains of causes and effects. Like if you think about a commandment like don't steal. So okay, let's everybody agree it's not good to steal. But the big problem today is not that somebody says, hey, I want to steal. What will you do to me? The big problem is that stealing has become so complicated that I'm stealing all the time and I'm not even aware of it. The commandment, don't steal, was formalized in an era when stealing meant breaking, I'm breaking into somebody's house and snatching some gold coins or a goat or whatever. And it was easy to at least understand what I'm doing and what the potential consequences are for the owner of the gold coins or the goat. But how do I steal today? Well, I put like $10,000, I have a pension fund, and $10,000 out of my pension fund are invested in some big oil corporation or chemical corporation that brings profits of, say, 4 or 5% every year, so it's a very good investment. And how does the corporation make such huge profits? For example, by dumping toxic waste into a river and polluting the entire water resources of the area and hurting the health of the local population and the wildlife and so forth. But the corporation is so rich that it can retain an army of lawyers that protects it against all lawsuits, and also a small brigade of people in the capital that block any attempt to have stronger environmental regulations. Now, am I guilty of stealing a river? I'm not even aware that part of my pension fund is invested in this corporation. And even if I am aware, I don't know how the corporation makes its money. It will take me months, maybe years, to find out what my money is doing. And during that time, I will be guilty of so many other crimes which I know nothing about. And really the problem is that our sense of morality, our sense of justice, like our other senses, was evolved in the ancient African savannah when your pension funds, you had just one pension fund, which was your kids. And you knew what your pension fund was doing. It was playing in the mud or something. And so the problem is not agreeing on basic morality. The problem is on understanding the extremely complicated chains of cause and effect in the world. And again, my fear is that maybe Homo sapiens is just not up to it. We have created such a complicated world that we are no longer able to make sense of what is happening. And if I look at politics in the US, again, from the vantage point of a medievalist, Republicans and Democrats seems almost identical. I just don't understand what's the difference. If you can enlighten me on this, what's the big difference between them in their ethical view, in their view of the world? They have a big difference in their understanding of cause and effect relations, but when it comes down to basic values, I think the difference is not big. But again, the problem is that maybe we are no longer able, like the engineers you gave the talk to. So they could all agree, yes, we should keep the golden rule. But then when they go to design some, I don't know, bridge or software, they don't understand what are the consequences of what they are doing. So how can they act morally without this understanding?
Well, you just described why we need a free press. I think that's one role the free press really plays today. And again, what's the upside of this age of acceleration is now an individual can go take a picture of that waste dumping by that factory, put it up on the internet, and it'll go around the world in 30 minutes.
Competing against funny cat videos.
No, actually, if you're in my business, you'll find that if I take a picture of General Electric doing that and put it up on the New York Times, General Electric will stop doing that, I can assure you. That will not compete with cat videos. So there's an upside to all of these. I think, Yuval, that I'm gonna, we're playing a very useful function here. I'll do the upside. And, but what people ask me what I do for a living. I tell them I'm a translator from English to English. That's what I do. I try to take complex things and break them down first so I can understand them, and then hopefully explain them to others. And I am really, my motto I've adopted from Marie Curie, who once said, "Now is the time to understand more so we may fear less." And now is truly, this is never good journalism. I think that practiced by the New York Times and many others has never been more important. To understand more so people will fear less. Because we now have a president who's actually in the fear business, backed up by a Pravda-like network called Fox Television that's in the business of making people stupid. And you put those two together, it's really dangerous. And the good news is, we are finding at the New York Times, more people, Donald Trump is always calling us the failing New York Times. I assure you, we are anything but that today. Because so many people are coming to, not just the New York Times, but to trusted news sites because they want to understand more so they may fear less. And so many individuals now can go out and actually be citizen journalists like never before. And I would say there's the political side of that is that, if you want to be an optimist about America today, I tell people, stand on your head. Because the country looks so much better from the bottom up than the top down, okay? So I think that as we go into this age of acceleration, national governments, with a few exceptions, are really too slow. Certainly the big democracies are, because we're too tribalized, partisanized now. They can't move at the pace of change, because government moves at the pace of trust, and there's no trust. The single individual, single family, way too weak against these forces. So I think it's the healthy community that is going to be the proper governing unit of the 21st century. And if you want to know what makes me an optimist in America, is that our country, the cliche about America is that we're divided by two coasts. So these two coasts, everyone is pluralizing, diversifying, globalizing, and modernizing. And in between them is flyover America, where everyone's high on opioids, voted for Trump, and waiting for 1950, okay? That's kind of the cliche. So, well, you only have to be from Minnesota, you only have to be from flyover America to know that is not true. America is actually a checkerboard today of communities that are collapsing from the bottom down and communities that are rising from the bottom up. So I did a trip a year ago to, I was invited to give a talk at our national lab at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, so I got the map out, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Hey, it's down here, southern tip of Appalachia. Haven't been to Appalachia. I think I'll do a car trip across Appalachia. I'm reading about all these people who voted for Trump. So I started the trip in Austin, Indiana. So that's the southern Indiana, northern tip of Appalachia. I went there because I'd read about the town, 4,400 people, and 5% of the town is HIV positive, which is just the worst possible levels of epidemic you can imagine. What was the story? 2 factories in the town. One closed, the other got automated. A lot of white working class men and women got unemployed very quickly. They couldn't adapt and fell into drug use, and you had son, father, grandfather, all shooting up together. It's a terrible story, and I went there to interview the one doctor in the town. Then I got in my car and drove 40 minutes south on I-70 to Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville, Kentucky has 30,000 open jobs. Anybody looking for a job? Louisville, Kentucky. So what's going on there? So which organisms thrive when the climate changes? They're called complex adaptive organisms. What's happening at the community level? The communities that are rising, they're creating complex adaptive coalitions. And what you see in Louisville, and I can show you communities all over the country, these complex adaptive coalitions, you have the business community now plugging directly into the public school system, K-12, community college, four-year college, translating in real time their skills, needs, and demands, okay? Not waiting for the schools to figure it out. Then you have the philanthropic community coming in, supplementing it with scholarships, after-school programs, supplemental learning opportunities. Then you have the local government catalyzing it all and hiring global recruiters to go into the world and find global investors for their local attributes. So in the case of Louisville, Louisville happens to be the capital of bourbon tourism. So Louisville is to bourbon what Napa Valley is to red wine. And there are now distilleries and bed and breakfast. You can go all, across. They've created a tourism industry. Louisville happens to be the headquarters of UPS. So you fly into Louisville Airport, all you see are factories everywhere. Because when Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com says, Yuval, I'll get you that product in 24 hours, it's because he's doing end-of-runway assembly and manufacturing now in Louisville. And Louisville is the headquarters of Humana, a wellness company. So the mayor's equipped any young person in the town who wants with a web-enabled, cloud-connected breathalyzer. And kids go out in the morning trying to create citizen scientists, and they map the air quality in their neighborhood, and they feed it all into a website in the city. They've created a complex adaptive coalition. And this is happening all over the country. And so we've got communities like Austin. That opioid crisis is real. They're collapsing. But those where you get this leadership together are creating complex adaptive coalitions. Come to my hometown of Minneapolis, 2.5% unemployment. Really thriving. They're not waiting for Washington, D.C., because there's a much higher trust there. My teacher, Doug Seidman, always says, trust is the only legal performance-enhancing drug. Okay? So where there's trust in the room, you can go really fast. You can go at the speed of this. And when there's no trust, like in Washington, D.C. right now, you can't move 2 inches.
So how do you make sense of this extremely complex and checkered reality? I mean, my job is much easier than yours, because as a historian who looks mainly at the past and also at long periods of centuries and thousands of years, so the main trends jump at you.
Yeah.
But how do you manage to make sense of such a complicated and contradictory reality? And how do you know that you're not just following your biases and seeing what you want to see?
So it's a combination, it's a very good question, of data. I mean, I can show you the employment statistics, the economies of these towns, and I can show you the proliferation of them. And then obviously reporting. And then anything is going to be a guess, But if I look at the country, I see the national statistics, what's going on. To me, the question is, and this I can't do, I can only report on what's going on, is what is the balance between these two trends? But as I'm not a historian, I'm a journalist, what I'm trying to do is by highlighting the positive trend, because I think one good example is worth 1,000 theories, that people will follow examples when they see people like them doing it. So my idealism is to say, here's what's working, and these people are just like you. So you can do it just like them. Israeli General Uzi Dayan, once said to me, Tom, I know why you're an optimist. I said, why? He said, it's because you're short. And I said, short? I'm not that short. He said, you can only see the part of the glass that's half full. Okay? So I'm actually not that short. But I do believe in Amir Levin's a physicist who helped me with all the physics in my book, Yuval. He likes to say, when people say, Amir, are you an optimist or a pessimist? He says, I'm neither. Because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything will be great. Everything will be awful. He said, I believe in applied hope.
Tom,
Don't know if it's going to work, but I believe in applied hope. Yeah.
I'm very interested in how Yuval has interrogated your optimism, and optimism, of course, would be the natural note to end on, but I want to hear a tiny bit more about your pessimism, and hopefully we can all think about how to walk out of here holding both of those ideas in our mind. Mm-hmm. You wrote in Sapiens, I believe, that there's no evidence that, I have it right here, no proof human well-being inevitably improves as history rolls along. Just a cheery thought for all of us as we wind down our time together. I wonder if you could help us think about that, what you've discussed this evening, and Tom's very convincing, data-rich argument that when you're doing yoga and standing on your head, you really can see roots of communities pulling together even in this disorienting moment. So help us leave here both pessimists and optimists.
Well, I try not to think in terms of pessimism and optimism. I
Or
mean,
neither is also a choice.
no. It's just that history just doesn't unfold in such a way. Usually you have terrible things and wonderful things happening at the same time, maybe in different places, but happening at the same time. Usually the same revolution, the same development. It's very rare when you have a big revolution in history which is doing only good or which is doing only bad. And of course, you have the added problem that those who lose the most and those who get extinct and those who disappear, they are not there to tell their story. So in history, there is always a certain bias towards the optimistic side. Hey, we are here,
Yeah.
so it couldn't have been that bad. The people for whom it was very bad, they are just not here. But this is
No, send us out on a very high note. Yeah.
so. And again, also as somebody who tries to see the big picture,
Yeah.
to look at the global picture, there is always the danger that you're always going to notice the agenda and the opinions and the interests of the hegemonic powers, of the more powerful people and societies and classes and whatever, because they dominate the conversation. So even if you oppose them, even if you think they are wrong, you are not going to miss their ideas. You might object to their ideas, you might fight against them, but you are not going to ignore them. The problem of the people who are like pushed to the side or pushed down is that they are very often just ignored. Not that you don't agree with what they say, not that you think their interests don't count, you just don't remember to even notice their point of view or their interests. So also the question of pessimism and optimism, it's always a question of who are you talking about. I think one of the main problems in talking about the global agenda or the problems of humanity and the kind of things that I try to do is that maybe there is no single future for the whole of humankind. Maybe the basic understanding of the world is just that different groups are going to have very different futures. Maybe, I mentioned earlier the question of what to teach your kids. So if you live in one place and belong to a particular community or to a particular group, so you teach your kids to be resilient, and you teach your kids computer code, and you teach your kids to play the violin. And you live in another place, maybe not very far away, and the best thing to teach your kids is how to shoot a Kalashnikov. And it's happening on the same planet at the same time. And what's more true or what's more important, it's kind of an empty question. It really boils down to the question of perspective. So this, I think, is kind of a historical law or an historical truth that there is never just a single story going around. And part of the responsibility, part of the difficulty, I think, of being a journalist or being a historian is how do you bring at least some justice to this situation, and how do you give at least some attention to all the different viewpoints and not just to the dominant one.
Before you close, Yuval, just talk a little bit about your next book and give us a little tease. I want to hear. I'm going to be very selfish here for a second, and then I'll do my thing.
So my next book is coming in August, September. It's called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, but it's not really a book of concrete lessons like do this, go there, whatever. It's more an invitation to take part in the major debates and discussions of the world, of the current moment. Continuing what I said earlier, I think one of the problems that most people today face is that they just don't have the time and the energy to be part of the global debate, of the debate about the future of humanity. There are all these big questions of climate change and artificial intelligence and bioengineering, and it's going to have an impact on the life of every single individual on the planet. But most people, they're too busy going to work and feeding their kids and taking care of elderly parents and so forth. They just don't have, it's a luxury to be able to think about these issues, to investigate them, to engage in the debate. And the problem with, and one of the problems again with history, is that history never makes any concessions and never gives any discounts just because you're in difficulty, or just because you're poor, or just because you're too busy taking care of your kids. If you don't have the time and the energy and really the luxury to be part of the debate, it doesn't mean that you won't suffer from the consequences. Because in this sense, history is completely unfair. And I see my job as a historian as trying to help at least a few more people take part in the debate. And this is the main purpose of the coming book.
So I guess I see my job is obviously, reporting whatever situation I'm assigned to report to, but I am always looking for examples of what's working and sharing them with people. So, because I think there's a power in that, and that's my version of idealism. It's why I went into journalism. Young people often come to me and say, I want to do what you do. What do I need to know? And, I say, you build to type fast. I can type really fast. I actually went to London secretarial school to learn how to type back in my day here. But I think that the most important thing you need as a journalist today is that you have to be a good listener. And for two reasons, and the second reason is more important than the first. The first is what you learn when you listen, But the second reason is what you say when you listen. Listening is a sign of respect. And my method to my madness, if you travel with me, is I really do try to listen to people. Whether I'm a little Jewish guy from Minnesota in the Arab world, or I'm in Russia, or I'm here, because I find that if you just listen to people, it's amazing what they'll let you say back. And if you don't listen to them, it's amazing you cannot tell them it's dark outside. And that's why I've often said, before I retire, I'm going to change my business card. It now says Thomas L. Friedman, New York Times, Foreign Affairs columnist. And I want to change it to Thomas L. Friedman, New York Times humiliation and dignity correspondent. Because I've basically spent my whole career covering people acting out on their humiliation, whether it's in the Middle East, we all know the stories there, or Russians feeling humiliated, or Chinese, and questing for dignity. But I may add also diversity correspondent. And that's where I would end, Rachel, as a columnist, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, especially when you're a once-a-week columnist, as I am now. So last summer, the head of the US Air Force invited me to join him on a tour of all America's air bases in the Middle East. It's a great opportunity to see this perspective of the world in the military. And I found myself in Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar the night Donald Trump was giving his press conference about the Charlottesville disturbances and talking about how there were good white supremacists and bad white supremacists. And that's all the world, or America, was talking about. And I was in Al Udeid Air Base at Qatar, and my column was due in a few hours. So I was staring at a blank screen, thinking about, what do I write? And then it just popped into my head. I looked around at my traveling party. The head of the U.S. Air Force, Dave Goldfein, is Jewish. We were traveling with the U.S. Air Force Secretary. She's a woman, Heather Wilson. Her chief executive officer is an African-American woman, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. Their guard's name was Juan. The head of the air base was an Armenian American. His deputy was a Lebanese American, and our intelligence briefer's name was Yang. Mr. Trump, which part of this sentence don't you understand? Okay, that is the real strength of America, our ability to make out of many one, you know? And in a world where we're all getting so mixed up now, I believe that virtue, that strength, is so important for every society now. It's more important than ever. And so I pray this man will be a one-term president, because we can take 4 years of him. We cannot take 8 years of him. He will destroy institutions in 8 years. But I know that underneath, you know, there's still a really powerful idea of America and diversity out there that I think even Donald Trump cannot crush. And that's why
Is it shared also by the average Trump voter? I mean, are you able also to listen to them? And
I don't think there is an average Trump voter, and I think that, because I think people came to him for so many reasons. Some people came because they were humiliated. Hillary Clinton said, "You're deplorable." Oh, I'm deplorable? Then I'm going to wear a t-shirt that says I'm a deplorable, okay? Some came because things you've talked about, Yuval, they want a wall to stop the pace of change. Some came for many reasons, but my way of approaching them, because I'm a Wednesday columnist, it means I write Tuesday for Wednesday, it means I have the first column after every election. So I had the column the night Trump won. And, the week before he won, I wrote my last column, and it was addressed to Trump voters. And it began, "Dear fellow Americans, treat people with respect." It's amazing, you know, if you start there, how much you can peel back, you know, just listen to people. And we have so many people broadcasting now, you know, and not listening, particularly in politics, that I think that that's truly the
Tom,
missing
I
ingredient.
do want to let you end on optimism, so I don't feel we should go too deep into the 2016 election in the United States of America.
One comment.
Yes.
Well, two comments actually about it. One, I think that, I mean, the Trump voters are still the future of America. I mean, if you don't have them, then America is going nowhere. So if you need to be optimistic about something, then you need to be optimistic about them as well. That
I think they're all people that you could take somewhere with a different message. Not all, but many of them.
And secondly, I would say about journalism. I agree that it is immensely important, especially today, especially for the viability of liberal democracies, because you know, democracy is to some extent based on Lincoln's maxim that you can fool some people some of the time, all the time, and you can fool all the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. And this is really just wishful thinking. You can fool people, I mean, not for eternity, nothing is for eternity, but you can fool all the people for a very, very long time. And the way to do it is to control the information they get. I mean, the basic idea of democracy is, okay, we elect a bunch of people to govern the country. And if they do a bad job, if they fail, then sooner or later enough people will realize it and they will change the government. And this works fine as long as you have free press and free journalism. If the government controls in some way or the other, directly or indirectly, if it controls the media, if it controls journalism, then it can always blame somebody else for its failures. It can always direct the attention towards all kinds of enemies, either real or imaginary, and there will never be a day of reckoning. So in this sense, there is no future to democracy without a strong and a free journalism.
Yuval, I think, yes, let's strong and free journalism. Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, on behalf of the New York Times, a rousing defense of a strong and free press works in very nicely to remind you that we were here this evening putting on this event. What a luxury, you called it, to engage in this debate and to listen, as Tom described, is so important as we do figure out and make our way toward the future. We are going to call it an evening here. I want to thank all of you for joining us, thank the New York Times and How To Academy for putting on this event, and please, of course, thank Yuval Harari and Thomas Friedman.
Great fun.
Have a good evening.